So on behalf of Australian Musician, thanks for your time today. Thanks for coming.
Wonderful.
It's great. It's a wonderful pleasure for me to finally meet you after being an admirer for decades.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. So I first requested to interview you quite a few weeks ago when you first announced the G3 anniversary tour, and I thought
Yeah.
that's a great reason to have a chat about things and talk about all things guitar and gear. And then all of a sudden, I saw the Sammy Hagar announcement, and you were swamped. And here we are, weeks later, before you've had a gap to come up for air, I think. So that,
Yeah. Yeah, that was crazy because we got a lot of requests for interviews, and I had this long list of things that I wasn't allowed to talk about. And
ah,
so I was talking to Melissa saying, well, what am I going to talk about if I can't talk about anything that's actually going to be happening?
yeah,
And
right,
I know I'd just anger all the journalists by not telling them what was actually going to happen. So
right.
now I can talk about everything now. So yeah, you
It's
fire
all out
away.
in the open. And is that a no? It's a crazy year. Is that a normal year for you in how you like to schedule things, or is this a particularly crazy year?
Uh, I can't think of over the last 3 or 4 decades, anything that's been normal. Every year has you scratching your head trying to figure out like why isn't this like last year, you know?
Right, right.
What has gone crazy here? So and the last 3.5, 4 years have just been insane anyway for everybody around the world. So
Yeah,
uh, it's no different. I think we're all so enthusiastic about being able to get together more freely, so that's really good.
yeah,
And it just so happened, um, if we start with G3, it got going because uh, my son, who's a young filmmaker, was talking to me about how this anniversary was coming up for the first G3, and he said, I turned 4 like a couple of days before the very first
right.
G3 concert and started touring. In other words, we brought him on tour. We figured 4 years old, he's old enough to join the
Right.
family circus.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he kind of grew up on tour, not only with us, his crazy parents, but with everyone else, just starting with Steve Vai and Robert Fripp and Kenny
Yeah.
Wayne Shepherd. He was the kid running around with a pail and a shovel while everybody had guitars on. And he stuck with it for the longest time, which is amazing for a kid to hang around with his parents like that. So,
Yeah.
uh, and he had this idea of doing a film that was really based on that story. The fact that he grew up with this. Uh, he is a guitar player, but he always chose not to make it his main thing.
Right.
But he's still intrigued by it. He still loves it, and he wanted to sort of get all the guitar players that were part of my sort of guitar playing family to sit down and talk about what the guitar meant to them and about G3 and just being in this generation of players.
Yeah.
And then to come out on tour with the G3 reunion because it's a reunion of his that he shares and of sorts, and then to come and play with us on one song, and we're going to be it'll culminate with the two last shows at the Orpheum in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
So there'll be the film, the documentary hopefully will come out about a year from now. We're also making a live audio album for ear music of the tour. So that's the biggest thing and the first thing that we were sort of working on for the last year.
Right.
And it's crazy, he's interviewed maybe 50 guitar players, Brian May and Robert Fripp and I mean Christopher Guest and Steve Miller and Steve Vai and Uno Bettencourt. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of people that he's done from, you know, Nita Strauss, and he's going to do Kirk Hammett later on this month and Paul Stanley. It's really interesting what he's gathering, and what's going to
Yeah.
be part of this documentary. And then just before we logged on here, I was just going over some music that Steve and I are working on, some new
Mhm.
music, 3 songs that we're preparing to coincide with us touring together. And that'll be a first for us, just the two of us.
I was going to
Go.
ask you if that had begun already. I read that that was sort of the second thing you were doing in amongst everything else.
Yeah,
But
actually
and
the third.
it's third,
I
is
don't
it?
want to be remiss in not mentioning the fact that I'm doing the Monsters
Oh
cruise
yes, of
in
course.
March,
Yeah,
and I'm very excited about that. Extreme will be on that as well as the Darkness, and a bunch of my friends like Glenn Hughes and Alex Kolnick, and there'll be
right.
lots of fun had on that thing. I've never been on a cruise before, so you know, I hope I can mingle, but I don't know if I'll be stuck in my cabin, taking
Practicing.
Dramamine or whatever.
Yeah,
But
that's right. What is it? Ginger, isn't it? I think ginger is the
whatever.
movement. Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
try everything.
yeah,
Maybe I'll be fine. I don't know.
yeah.
Um,
By
but
the
I am
way,
excited.
I'm sure Christopher Guest would be very privileged to be in that list of people, guitar players you were just listing before.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So then there's the what we're calling the Satch Vi tour,
Yeah.
which will be a ton of fun, and we are working on these new pieces of music that we will release before the tour, and hopefully we'll have time to play them every night. And then there's the Sammy Hagar Best of All Worlds tour, and
Of
that was
course.
also some music that we were trading early this morning. So I know I look like I just got up, but I've been up for hours, like working on music.
No, I just got up. It's early here. That's all
Okay.
right. But so with the Satch Vi tour, how's that creative process going? Do you guys live near each other? Is that completely remote? How are you working on that material?
Oh, it has to be remote. Yeah, even though we're only about 400 miles apart. I'm in San Francisco, he's in Los Angeles. It's
Right.
actually could be different countries actually,
Yeah.
as far as the psyche of California goes. But um, he has been incredibly busy, even more than me. So tracking him down has been pretty hard. So
Right.
I figured as the dates were, we had like a crazy idea, and then it was like it's a good idea, and then the record company got involved, and then all of a sudden we went, wow, we better like do some work. So I looked at his schedule and I thought, I think he's a little bit more busy than me, so I'll start. So I wrote two songs. I got together with my producer Eric Codieu and for help, and he's like the central guy. He's down in Los Angeles as well. So after I did all my parts and everything, I sent everything to him. He threw some suggestions back at me. We fixed up the session files, and then they were delivered to Steve just a couple of days ago. And in the last few days, he's listened to everything. He's extremely happy, and he's ready to turn everything upside down, which we've asked him to do,
Right. Yeah.
because it is a collaboration. So in the next couple of days, I'll find out how upside down everything has
Right.
become, what I need to replay happily, and then we'll move on from there. So I'm just waiting for the session file for the last song. So
Right.
that's something I'm really looking forward to playing to. I
So
have
three new.
rehearsals next
Sorry.
week, so I
Yeah.
actually Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yeah, I've got 4 days,
More than enough. That's fine.
more than enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So three songs. What style? What are they? Do you have ballads? Do you have?
Yeah, that's really a tough one. I don't know. What do you call what Steve and I do? I mean, we're rock and roll generation kids, and so it's always going to wind up sounding like that. We tend to
Yeah.
play a lot of notes. Excuse me, that we do.
We love it. That's exactly
Uh,
what we'd expect.
yeah, we're aggressive players, and we like to push harmony quite a bit.
Mm.
I think I'm a bit more, I'm just like a half a generation older, and I think you can really hear it in my style. I lean more towards classic rock song construction,
Yeah.
and Steve is a little bit more forward, a little bit more modern in that sense. He's just about 3 years younger than me, but it made a difference, I think.
Yeah.
And then he gravitated towards. So I think it's a really cool um, collaboration because of that. Because if everyone is the same, not much. There's no tension to make things interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's kind of like when writing stuff with Sammy and the guys in Chickenfoot, because we're so different and we've been playing in different bands for so long. When we get together to write, there's just so much energy because everyone's pushing and pulling in a different direction,
Yeah.
and we wind up creating this other element, that is the combo element, which is
Yeah.
really cool. So,
Certainly
um,
those back and I'm not sure it's quite the same now, but certainly back even when I was younger in the late '80s and listening to you, and then grunge came along. So those few years with friends with other instrumentalists and other musicians certainly make a massive difference to their styles and tastes. So I understand what you mean with Steve and you. Even those few years back then can make a massive difference to your
Yeah,
influence.
huge difference. And thank God. I mean, it just goes to show you guitar, when a new generation comes along and they're pissed off and they're angry and they want to change
Yeah,
things, they grab a guitar, which
yeah,
is really great. And it keeps the instrument evolving all the time, and it makes it really vital. And it's fun, but it's impossible to keep up with. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
at some point you go like, I can't learn every style that pops
yes,
up every 3 years, and so you
yeah.
can sit back and enjoy, So yeah, there's a lot of that going on right now. Younger players.
A friend of mine calls that time lock. You sort of get you get your style of clothes or anything or playing, and you tend to stay in that, and you don't venture to. It becomes increasingly difficult to get outside of that as you move along.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember reading a report in the New York Times where scientists figured out that for guys between, I think, the ages of around 10 or 11, your absolute most favorite musical tastes are formed.
yeah,
And for women, it's just like maybe a year longer. Maybe they do that at 11 or 12 or something.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, we are, creatures of habit, and we're
For sure.
strange and we
Yeah,
and our bodies like to lock into things, and so yeah, there's that groove that
yeah.
you seem to identify with at some point early in your life, and that is the basis for everything else. Doesn't mean you
Sure.
can't acquire, but it's not the same as that natural feeling you get when you
Yeah.
hear that music, like when you were 10 years old, that
That's
kind of
right. Yeah, those moments in time albums, and for me, you certainly have at least two or three of those that are locked into my youth. So
thing.
just on that, I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. Uh, you did a workshop here about 10 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
You came and did a workshop, yeah, and that was great to watch you in that mode that you've been revered as a guitar teacher. We all know of all the famous students you have, in your past. But actually seeing you in that teacher mode was really, really interesting, and certainly revealing about why you're revered as a great teacher. You just have this great wisdom and philosophy around all of the things that you do, which not everybody does. I've interviewed quite a few guitar players, and you're looking for this deep meaning behind why they construct things a certain way or do things a certain way, and it's often, man, I don't think about it that much; it just comes out. And so,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
certainly with
You're
you, it was
different.
like, no, no, I think about all of this, and this is why it comes out, and this is what I think. At least that's what came across. And you said something that was I thought was really, really great for everyone there to hear, which was some days, just like everybody else, you pick up the guitar and it feels like an alien being, and you feel like you've got clubs on your hands, basically. And then the next day you pick it up and you're a genius and things just flow.
Yeah.
Do you still feel like that? Is that something that still comes to you in those sort of ebbs and flows of life? Is that still something that influences you in that way?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just your body, the rhythms of your body. You're not always 100%. And
Mm,
if you play sports, you're totally familiar with that. Some days you're brilliant, some days you're just clumsy,
yeah,
uh, or just less brilliant, whatever, or you don't enjoy it as much. Or what I've learned is that during those awkward moments, those few hours, or maybe that day where you just can't seem to get it together, it's an opportunity to do something else.
mm,
And so I know that because it's my job to play, I know I have to play. I just have to stay familiar with the instrument. But if I, start out trying to do some of my most difficult stuff and I'm not feeling it, then I'll just put it down and I'll say, well, I can play lots of stuff. I can go pick up the acoustic and work on my finger picking. I can pick up the 12 string and just strum along and
yeah,
come up with a different kind of a song. I may pull up a demo on Pro Tools and just start editing, and I play a little keyboards, and I play a little bass, so I can easily switch, stay musical, keep the ideas flowing, but maybe give the left hand a rest.
Yeah.
uh, I think not everyone is like that, though. I mean, it's interesting because in the years of doing G3, I've got to hang out and be really casual with some of the greatest players that have ever played electric
Mm,
guitar, and some of them don't have these issues
right.
uh, that I've experienced. And besides it making me incredibly angry, it- just to watch Paul Gilbert like rehearse and talk on the phone at the same time, you
Yeah.
just go, really? Can I have just
Yeah.
a little of that, Paul? But
Yeah.
some players just have this gift where it's always easy, but it might be something else. Maybe it might be an emotional thing. It might be a writing thing. It might be a sound thing. Everyone has got something that they're wishing they had 10% more
Of
talent in
course.
that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
And but when you're on the outside looking in, like I'll stand next to John Petrucci and I'll say, John, that's impossible. Like, how can you just do that every night?
Yeah.
And he goes, I don't know, it's easy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, but as I've said before, this week, as a matter of fact, because a lot of people ask me about this during the interviews, is that I've always felt that it's been a good struggle, a healthy struggle for me to play the guitar, and I really have to rehearse and keep my chops up and keep an
Mm,
eye on my uh, muscles and tendons, and just I have to be
yeah.
really vigilant. I'm just not one of those players that can just pick up a guitar and show you 100% of what I have.
Mm.
Uh, so that sucks, but
It is,
it's
it's reality, and it's nice for other guitar players to hear that you have
it's
that
all right.
reality, I think.
Yeah,
That's good.
I have to always look back and go, but it's worked out for me, so
Yeah.
it's not an issue really.
Yeah, no, you've done okay, I think. But going back to those early years, actually, when did you realize that because you had so many opportunities, you dream opportunities, some would say, you played with so many people, with Mick Jagger and all those famous gigs, and then
Yeah,
Deep Purple, and had that opportunity to join Deep Purple, and you chose not to. Was
yeah.
that, looking back? I mean, it's easy to say retrospectively what it was, but at the time, were you thinking you're making artistic choices about being the solo artist that you want to be? Was that a conscious choice, or was that just you were just navigating it one decision at a time at the time? But did you have an overarching vision about that?
Yeah, well, working with Mick was great, and that was just the craziest stroke of luck that just landed in my lap.
Mm,
I have to say I was ready. I've told the people at my camps, the G4 camps, that you have to prepare for good luck, as completely far-fetched as it may seem.
mm,
It'll happen, and if you're not prepared, then it's your fault. And so when we got the call that I was invited to this audition for Mick Jagger, we of course we my managers and we had a good laugh for about a minute, but because I wasn't the right guy, and I wasn't,
yeah,
it's silly, but we all thought, well, you got to go because it's
it's Mick
big. You get
Jagger.
to hang out and
Yeah.
say hi, right? And um, and I knew some of the guys in the band, so that was really cool. Uh, but I was prepared. I got to say, I already knew all the stuff. I'd spent years playing in cover bands,
Mm,
and I just happened to really love the Rolling Stones ever since I was a little kid. Even before I was a drummer, I was into the Rolling Stones. So that came naturally, and I had other things that I had, let's say, professional musician attributes that I had really worked on. I'd recognized, like, you got to have these things together if you want to get ahead. So I just brought it all to bear in that audition, and I got lucky. So, and luck is a big part.
yeah.
The same thing happened, with Deep Purple. I just happened to be a huge Deep Purple fan, but to tell you the truth, I turned the gig down immediately when the first phone call came in
All
because
right.
it's because it was put to me, how would you like to replace Richie Blackmore in Deep Purple? And I said, like, nobody can replace Richie Blackmore. Don't call me again.
Right.
That was back when phones were like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Long
right.
time
Yeah.
ago.
More
Uh,
dramatic. Yeah.
yeah, I know. It's like it's not very dramatic,
Doesn't
right? I'll
work. Yeah.
throw your phone, but they're too expensive to throw across the room, actually.
That's right.
So,
But it wasn't
it's
a
funny.
but it wasn't actually an artistic like you weren't thinking this is the artist I want to be. I'm making these decisions because of that
No,
reason.
no, both opportunities came out of the blue. They were completely unexpected,
Right.
and with the Deep Purple call, 30 minutes later, I called back my manager and I said, "Did you tell them?" I said, "No," and they laughed. And they said, "No, we knew you changed your mind. We just That's how well they knew me. So, and because I thought to myself, like, how silly. Like, I'm a musician. That's what I do. I play
Mm,
music for people. Why would you say no? So go do it. And then, of course, once we had one rehearsal. I mean, it was a funny gig to try to learn because I had 1 week to prepare and one rehearsal in Tokyo before the show the following night.
wow.
And I'd
Right.
never met these guys before. They were just legends to me.
Yeah.
Uh, and I had two cassettes to learn from. So Roger had sent me two cassettes from the last show in Germany, but halfway through the show, Richie had left. So there
Oh.
was no guitar for the second half.
Great.
I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that anyway, it was great to play with them. Was great because they were an amazing band and great people, and so it was so easy just to join in with the fun.
Yeah.
But truthfully, I didn't take uh, the offer, to be a full member because I couldn't get over Richie. Um, the fact that I was a big fan, and every time I played one of their songs, this year heard me and this year kept hearing Richie.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like, hey, how come you don't sound like Richie? That kind of thing. And then I thought, what am I doing? I'm an American kid, and what am I doing joining this classic British band? And I
Yeah.
remember sitting down with Roger and just saying, I just don't, I can't see myself as much as I love you guys, I can't see myself as being in Deep Purple. So
Wow. That's an
uh,
honest answer. Yeah. That's
it
that's a
was a
big
bit
deal to do
heartbreaking,
that.
but yeah, I had
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted just before we get into the best of all worlds, I wanted to talk you a bit about the gear you use, and I've seen a lot of things about you talking about your equipment over the years, and you seem to be the least gear obsessed out of a great many guitar players from your era, which is really interesting, and I want to dig into that for a minute. Um,
Sure.
so to me, you're the master of the instrumental ballad. So from the period that's most influential for me, I mean, Vi has his "For the Love of God," but you
Yeah.
have "Always with Me, Always with You," which was the first rock guitar ballad that charted. I mean, in Australia, that was in the charts. With our sort of version of MTV, your film clip was on that every morning, every Saturday morning that we'd record it. So that was a big deal to see, and then for me, with the extremists, you did Cryin, which I think is just. I mean, I know you've written great pieces before and since. That one specifically for me is just incredible. I think the expression in that. So
Thank you.
within that, there's a question. So with your gear, I know I've read or seen you interviewed about the recording process in different times, and you arguing with producers or engineers when they've gone, that take's fine. You've gone, no, you'd give a vocalist 5 takes. Give me some more takes at this, because this is my version of the vocal take, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
so within not being particularly gear obsessed, so I don't want to make it specifically about gear, although I do want to ask some questions. Do you look for something like Crying has very specific feedback and very specific harmonic content within it? So
Yeah.
within your gain or signal chain where you're running, like a DS1 or the pedal or and you're chaining that into a Marshall or whatever amp you're running into, what particular characteristics are you after at the time? Are you after specific overtones? How do you tune a piece of gear quickly And I've got another story about that, but I'll try not to digress too much. Uh, so, what do you look for quickly within that tone to be able to get what you need out of the amp and setup?
Yeah, boy, this is there's there's two really big uh revelations here, I think, to that I have to lay on you. Number one is that I really do believe that the importance of the gear for the musician is to be a path to a magical performance. It's not about, I mean, specifically, it's really not about how expensive it is or how the high fidelity of it or whatever, you know.
Mm,
It's nothing about that. It really is about the performance because there are more wealthy musicians who can't make magic, you know, and out there than by far than there are just musicians who can make magic with anything, you know.
mm,
But it's the key because really when you look back at everything that you love, all the songs that you love over your life, you never for 1 second questioned what the gear was you know, before you decided whether to like it. You know,
yeah, yeah,
that song that means so much to you because it's attached to a person you love or an event in your life that was so important, a tragedy or something that was just wonderful. You never thought, is that drummer using a Black Beauty on the snare? I don't know if I like the song or not. You know,
that's
is he
right.
using nines or tens? I don't know
Yeah,
if I like it or not.
so
It's got
true.
nothing to do with that. And
Yeah,
I've been in the studio and I've held, you know, 59 Les Pauls that are just really expensive. And I've plugged them in and I've looked at the engineer's face and watched them go, no, not that one. What about that one over there? And, you know, and you just
yeah,
wind up with something that for some reason is a conduit for the performer to create magic.
yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I've expressed that
Mm,
succinctly enough, but that's it. So the second one, this will blow your mind. So the morning that we go to do Cryin, we're in Los Angeles at Ocean Way, Studio One, the big studio. We've talked about how are we going to do this song, and we're just doing. We've got Greg and Matt Bissonette in the music room, in the big room,
mhm,
and I said, well, I'll play keyboards. I'll record it on the sequencer, and then they can play to the sequence keyboard. So that's what the arrangement is. So we start that way. And then at one point, Andy turns to me, and this is Andy Johns, the
yeah.
engineer producer, and he says, you know, Joe, I think you should play along. That might help them follow where it's going. And I said, great. And then so then he went back to just his job, which was to get the drums and the bass to sound totally awesome, right? So he's not paying attention to me and the assistant. So the assistant says, what do you want to plug into? And I went, oh, I've got this little Zoom headphone amp. Let's just use that. That'll be fun. So I plug into that. He takes the stereo out. He plugs it in. Andy brings up the faders and he's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, let's go. And we do a take and he turns around and literally, I remember this because he turned around, he's got tears in his eyes, and he goes, "Oh my God, that was it. That was the most beautiful performance you've ever done. What what the fuck did I do? How did I record that?" And I said, "Well, that was just the Zoom." And he's like, you know, for an engineer,
Yeah.
it was like he had committed the greatest feat of magic and the greatest sin, which was not pay attention to how he recorded his client, you know.
Yeah.
And and so for weeks after that, we thought like, what are we going to do with that, you know? And then he kept saying, "You'll never play that again." And I'm like, "Sure, I can play it
Oh,
again.
wow. Yeah.
Don't worry about it." So finally, we relocate to Record One in the Valley, and we're doing the overdubs. And we get to that song, and of course, as soon as I plug in, there's no way
Oh,
that I can rejoin that moment. That
yeah.
moment was magical, and no one knows why. It wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
But what my guitar sound is that little, I don't know, what was it, $200 at the time? All the delay, the reverb, compression, everything went straight to tape. There was nothing we
Oh,
could do with it. We couldn't punch in, we couldn't fix. All we could do was to add, you know, I added some piano and organ. We had the original, what was it called? D50, Roland
hmm.
D50
Yeah.
keyboard.
Yeah.
And I think I added some like 12-string electric arpeggios like at one point or something. But that was it. And people ask me about that all the time, and I go, it was a little headphone amp, and what we weren't paying attention. I literally was like
Wow.
standing in the back of the control room. Everyone was facing the window. No one was looking at me. I just closed my eyes and played the
And maybe
song.
that's why the magic was there, right? It wasn't the red light fever, as you say, right? It
It,
was like there's no pressure on you.
exactly.
It just came
And
out.
and the gear was a conduit
Yeah.
to performance. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah, its value had nothing to do with the value of the magic that happened for those
Yeah.
4 minutes.
You're
And
absolutely right. You have blown my mind, and I simultaneously love and hate that story. That's fantastic.
I'll tell you one little thing. I've worked with the two brothers, Andy and Glenn Johns, both brilliant human beings, brilliant producers and engineers, completely different in every way.
Yeah.
But years later, when I was working with Glenn, he said something to me that was just so perfect, and it tied into that moment with Andy, which was we were talking about doing an overdub, and we in the album we did in '95 was largely a live album,
Hmm.
and I said, oh, one day, like this song would be great if we had like an overdub here. I could do a second guitar, and he looked at me with that fantastic accent, and he said, Joseph, you can never return to the party once it's over. And I
Oh,
thought
what a
about that for
great
a second.
line.
I thought, I know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, what a great
Like,
line.
you
Yeah.
can try to make people believe I was really there when that happened, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
You know, the magic in the room is really something.
So is, and the saying that, the first rule of a party, you can't move a party. That's just what
Yeah,
it is. It's right there, right?
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. So now we've got to the gear doesn't matter. I want to ask specifically about some gear.
It doesn't matter, obviously. I got nothing but gear in this room.
No. But I mean, you've gone through a lot of different changes, your amps with the JSX with the PV and your pedals with Vox, and then there and not and there and not. But in the end, I mean, I've worked with Boss and for Boss for a long time. I don't at the moment, but uh, I've always seen the basic sort of DS1 and maybe a DD3 sitting on your pedal board at different times. And a friend of mine who was you did an in-store here maybe 30 years ago, a long time ago, and at a large music store chain called Allen's, which is long since defunct here now, but he was managing the store and he's a guitar player, and he said you sort of walked in and you're going to play in store, and he basically just asked for a DS1 and a DD3 or something like that. Just give me one of those. He's like, what are you going to do with those? He just plugged into the nearest. He said, I think it was a JCM 900 or something at the time. Plugged into that, went duk 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 for 2 minutes, and went, okay, let's go. And he said everyone was just going, well, what is he using? And DS1 sales and DD3 sales went through the roof for the time. He said, but he knew then the dream was over. It was like, it's like people would say when they plug into Eddie's rig, it's like, oh, I still sound like me. The dream's over. But what I would ask you about that with DS1 is what you use it for, because obviously DS1 is lauded for being quite a harsh distortion at different times. But I suspect, and I don't know, and I would like you to tell me whether you use it as part of your gain structure with the output being more cranked than the distortion in order to feed the front of the amp more. Is that more how you run that particular, or that style of gain pedal? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, the DS1's interesting. First of all, it's solid state. That's the first thing you have to know.
Yeah.
And so this is for someone like myself who plays melodies and uses the entire range of the guitar. There's something that it does that really helps me out there, which is that it represents the low notes and the high notes in with almost the same amount of transient response. That's a very fancy way of saying it even
Mhm.
things
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those who don't care about the transients and words like that.
Yeah.
With tubes, you get noise, you get compression, you get funny little peaks of frequencies. Like with
Mm.
EL34s, there's this 1 to 2K kind of thing that sometimes sounds really nasally and pokey. And if you're playing high melodies, it can be really difficult in a live situation to keep it together.
Mm.
The low end isn't very punchy. If you use 6L6s, like with a 5150, you get a lot of energy in there, but you also get a lot of grit. It's not as
Yeah.
smooth like the EL34, so you get a lot of grit. So when I started out with the idea of doing melodies live, I'd never done it before. But one thing I did remember was that I had spent from 78 till about 85 playing with two Marshall 100-watt half stacks. And I'd about given up trying to get these things
Yeah.
to be able to sing and sound beautiful. They were great at power pop and punk and that sort of raucous rock and roll. But that that wasn't where I was moving, and I thought, well, I can't play with my old rig. So I when I started to do the solo records, I just didn't bring any of the gear to the studio.
Right.
First record I did, the full length record, I showed up with the Boss pedals, and I said I'm going to use whatever's in the closet. I knew the studio owner would have at least a couple amps, so it was a Fender Pro Reverb, silver drip
Yeah.
edge, not known and not revered at all back then. You know, people
Yeah.
hated it because it wasn't a blackface or a tweed. And I said, that'll be fine. And I set it up. I put in the DS1 and I turned it up conversational level, maybe 85, 90 dB. And John Kunenberty said, like, really? Like, where are your Marshalls? He'd been recording me for like 5, 6 years. And he's like, we're going to do it like this. I said, we're going to do it like this. I said, I know you have expensive microphones in the closet. Go get them. I, I want like a $2,000 microphone on the amp, like if, a famous vocalist came in and you wanted to capture the voice. I said, this is how we're going to do it. And that was the beginning of it. And we slowly started to figure out how we could step backwards again into using the Marshall heads. But the DS1 allowed us to control that transient response, the pokey things, and
Mm.
allowed me to play higher melodies without them always being too skinny and too raunchy. An 8-bar solo in a rock song, yeah, you can take everybody's head off,
Yeah.
but you can't play a song like Cryin or Friends or even Surfing with the Alien doesn't really work if it's too pokey because there are too many high notes up there. As Summer Song, I mean, the second
Yeah.
verse is all the way up there
Yeah.
in the dusty parts of the neck, you know what I mean? So yeah, something, has to be able to control that. Now in the studio we have compressors. You can put 7 mics it's interesting. When John Kunenberry recorded my melodies and solos for Summer Song, he used 1 mic. A year later, when we were doing the drums and just adding some other stuff, uh, Andy Johns, who finished the album for me, would always put 7 mics on a Marshall cabinet.
Wow.
And he would sit in the studio and blend all seven until he heard what he thought was the sound. Not no buzziness, but clear. He used to call it harmonic distortion.
Mm.
I'm not sure that's an accurate term, but that's what the term he used to clean things up.
Yeah.
But even then, he liked burying the guitar in the mix. So if you listen to like
Mm.
Friends or War from that album, you'd go like, wow, that's like low in the mix and in the center,
Yeah.
but the beat is huge. And it was a very different way of mixing than, let's say, John Kunenberty or even his brother Glenn, who always used to say, Glenn used to say, uh, Joseph, your guitar can never be too loud. Every
I
time I
love the
say it, like,
accent.
is that a little loud? I'm terrible at that. I'm sorry, Glenn,
Yeah.
but anyway, and the other thing that was really important that I know pissed a lot of people off was that they'd ask me like, how come you're not using a Bradshaw rack
Yeah.
and a Vera a modded amplifier? And I'd say, do you realize like what I get paid for doing these things? And do you know how much money I would spend getting all this gear together? I said,
Yeah.
this thing costs $39, and I can go anywhere in the world and plug into just about any amp that's clean, and I can make it work, and I don't have to think about anything else. And I know that it's not, you don't want to write about it. There's never going to be an article in Guitar Extravaganza magazine about saving money,
Yeah.
doing it cheap. But I said, you realize that for me, that frees me. And I never have to
Mm,
think about the gear. I just go, yeah, you got a DS1 and a DD3 and some kind of a clean amp. We're finished with that. Now, let me look at my audience and create some magic for them. That's all
yeah,
I was trying to do, was to cut out the clutter and the drama on that side of the stage because I didn't want it. I just wanted to plug into something to set me free.
yeah,
And you have to play for the audience. You've got to connect to them. It's not, you can't impress people with the gear if you can't move them.
yeah,
You know what I mean? You got to reach out
yeah,
and
for
touch them.
sure.
It's the important thing. So
So on that, now we've covered that piece of gear and how that works for you. I've read with the Best of All Worlds tour that
yeah,
you're going to try and pay respect to different eras of Eddie's tone,
yeah.
which I just that makes my mind go boom because I just that's horrendously complicated. So how do you intend to even start or try to do that? I mean, I know you'll have no trouble doing the playing. You're going to play like Joe Satriani, which is what everyone expects, I'm sure, anyway, and pay respect to Eddie. But when you said that about tonally, I went, wow, how are you going to approach that? What do you have any ideas yet about how you're going to do that?
Yeah. There's a couple of things that you can zero in on. Like this. I was using this is one of the guitars I used during the Howard Stern show.
Hmm.
It's tuned to a D standard, which is really low,
Yeah.
and the strings are 11. That was that was my first two big mistakes because I can't play 11s, and tuned down to D was like is I just wasn't used to it.
Yeah.
Sammy and the guys, they've been doing it for years, but I was it was foreign to me.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things don't happen. So, um, Eddie played at 440 and then E flat,
Yeah.
and he played light strings. He played nines, and even sometimes the lower strings were lighter. Um, and every time I talk about Eddie, I finish it by saying, besides the fact that he was a genius, because you
There is
always
that
have to
element.
add that in.
Yeah.
He was just amazing, and period. So,
Yeah.
because every time he picked up a guitar, no matter what it was amazing. So it was, he had the hands and the heart, everything. I'm just catching up. So, um, I think what I learned from the Howard Stern show, besides it's still important to rehearse, and you can't do gigs without rehearsals.
I think
Uh,
every guitar player felt for you that day. There are nobody looking to crucify you for that. Nobody.
So, but what it confirmed was a couple of things I was thinking about, which was that, Eddie had specific gear. He really
Mm,
did. He didn't play with the gear I used, or Steve Vai, or Slash, or Tom Morello, or any of his contemporaries. He actually had a very specific setup. And you ask
mm,
yourself, well, why? Well, it's because besides he was a genius, as we know, he knew that in order for him to play those parts, he had to have his gear tweaked a certain way.
mm,
Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So,
mm.
like when you go to play the beginning of Mean Streets, if your setup is not allowing those harmonics to jump out, it's going to sound like you're not hitting them.
Yeah.
So you've got to get the setup right. If you refer like to the first, let's say if you go to Live Without a Net, or
Yeah.
any of those things, even the early period, 5150 period, from Roth to the early Hagar period, where he's still using Marshalls, when he goes to do things like that, it's a success. Every time he goes to hit a harmonic, boom, there it
Yeah.
is. And it's low noise, big round fidelity, still sounds organic. You fast forward to Live at the Tokyo Dome, it's a totally different thing.
Mm,
He's playing an entirely different amp. When he goes to do those things, he's getting an overt amount of harmonic information, but he's also getting a ton of noise, and none of the
yeah.
body
Yeah.
that that was part of the earlier sound. Now I learned that because of those two amps right there. I got those
Yeah.
back when Alex and Dave called and asked me to do the Eddie tribute tour. And I thought, well, I got to figure this out. So the first thing I did was I got a couple of those, and I thought, well, this is great. You get all the harmonics, but man, this is like really small sounding. This is like for modern,
Mm,
you know. If I was 20 years old and I was playing modern rock, those would be the best amps ever.
yeah.
but I'm not, and I still want to hear sort of the body of the guitar, and I want to hear a more dynamic mix. So I started to think, well, what's my favorite Van Halen section? And I did find that period in '86. I talked to Sam quite a bit about it, and he said, yeah, that first 5150, he was still using Marshalls. It still was,
Yeah,
to in Sammy's view, his favorite sound that Eddie ever made.
yeah,
It didn't, it wasn't small and then stereoized and
yeah.
so I reached out to Delana Scott, at Third Power Amplifiers, and she is building me what we believe is going to be the amp that does it.
Oh my God. Right.
Yeah.
That is a
So
massive
I don't know
revelation.
what just happened there. Did you see
What?
that?
I did
I
not
don't
do
know.
that.
I did. I went like this, and then something
That
happened.
is amazing. I think it was you talking about the magical amp, the most magical amp throughout history, and this is that,
Okay.
and that brought lasers up. That's amazing.
I
I didn't
did.
do
I did.
that.
Yeah, I'm thinking, is there a foot pedal?
That's
Where's my
great.
LD?
The timing is fantastic. That's just so appropriate.
So
So third power, building you the ultimate
yeah,
Eddie amp.
yeah. So
Wow.
I know I need it because this goes back to what I said earlier about how the gear is so important for the performer. It has to
Yeah.
make it. I know that when we step out on stage, and whether I'm playing, ain't talking about Love or 5150,
Yeah.
I'm gonna I'm gonna need to feel and hear that sound to
Yeah.
convince myself to keep going, you know.
Yeah.
And if it's not working, then I'm just gonna say, well, let me just have my solo rig. But
Mm.
my solo rig is designed, probably has a little too much gain and is designed to make the high strings really fat sounding because I play all the melodies. I play
Yeah.
very little rhythm guitar all night long. It's just solo melody, solo melody.
Yeah.
And I can't play the Hagar set like that. It's just the wrong sound. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And the chicken foot, it kind of worked. Uh, uh, but for the Van Halen stuff to really pop, and then I've got to do so we're doing Montrose, we're doing
Yeah.
Sammy Hagar solo stuff, we're doing my stuff, we're doing chicken foot. It's a really fun set list.
Oh
The
yeah. That sounds
really
amazing.
a great set list. And but I know in my heart that I want to hear that sound in my head, that mythical Eddie Van Halen sound that we all sort of hear in our
Yeah.
minds, and I want to be able to feel it. And so I've been getting these clips from Delana every week, and the stuff that she's building is really amazing.
So,
Uh,
so you're after an amp that's going to represent those different periods. Like, is it like a three-channel amp, or are you just after the one Magic Marshall
I think what
tweaked
I'm going to
amp?
do is, I mean, I don't know if this is going to work, but I think what I'm going to try to do is to have a dry wet system, where I have just one dry cabinet and I'll have the two stereo wets. But I
Yes.
don't think I'm going to try to replicate stereo from or stereo chorusing, let's say, from the stage so much.
Yeah.
I know what Sam likes. We've made records and toured quite a bit, and he really likes direct, gutsy guitar playing. He likes
Yeah.
it loud and rough. And so I don't want to go too processed. I know that the front of house engineer, he can always add in, digital chorusing, imaging. He can,
Yeah.
delay, reverb, all that kind of stuff. I'll probably just try to keep it as simple as possible. A couple of pedals on the floor. I'll have a wah-wah and you have to have one of those momentary flanger pedals for all the
Yeah. Of
school.
course. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but the main thing is going to be, can you have that one sound that'll carry you through? And that's what I learned from the Live Without a Net. It's most of the stuff sounds similar as far
Yeah.
as the gear goes, and Eddie is just having the time of his life. He's just running around like
Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
and he's such a solid player, that he could do that, and it didn't bother him that he wasn't representing each song as it was recorded.
Yeah.
Can't do
Absolutely.
that. If you're lucky enough to stick around and have 5 or 6 albums, you're never going to be able to do that over and over again. And
Yeah.
I don't think that would be fun for him. He'd just be pedal dancing all night long.
Mm.
It's difficult. actually, as the stages get bigger, to um, to be able to relate if your sound keeps changing. You
Yeah,
know, from like, oh, I used a Vox on this, and then I used a Fender on that, and I used a Marshall stack on that. That'll drive you crazy. You
yeah.
just kind of want to get a good sound and go with it.
Love it.
You know, so, and the other thing is the guitar. I think I'm going to skip the D-tuner. I don't really like that thing, and
Yeah,
it's like more of a problem. So the two EVH guitars I have right now, I've got the D-tuners on them. I'm going to have them removed, and we're just going to work on them and get them to the point where they, my vibrato bars float, and as
yeah.
a lot of my uh, tricks and little things that I add to the melodies depend on me being able to pull up. And of course, lots of Eddie's parts all depend on that not being able to happen.
Locked down. Yeah, yeah. Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
So that's a whole other thing. If you're going to do Judgment Day, you can't have a floating uh, tremolo, and
No.
there's certain thing you can't do the double stops with the bending and because it'll go out of tune. So
Yeah.
that's another learning curve I have to get over, and I have to have a bunch of guitars set up with the Floyds that rest on the body. So
I'm
uh,
sure you're going to slay it, Joe. There's no question, and that's that level of detail that you've just told me is maybe way further than I thought you might do, which is great. I mean, I love that a detail-oriented person in that way. I think that's fantastic. And going back to how so you do that workshop and how you teach and think about things, I shouldn't be surprised that this is the process you'll have to go through to make it okay for yourself.
yeah,
Which is just fantastic. Um,
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I know we're getting towards an hour, and I've just had a blast. Thank you so much. Um, and just going back to a story that I've seen you tell about Hendrix and about he was that guy, and I think you walked off the football team the day he died, and went, I'm going to be a guitar player and all that. So
Yeah.
just so it's said, and I'm sure you know, and if you don't, you should. You're that person to me and a whole bunch of other guitar players of my generation since. So I think it's super important for us that you're continually making music and being creative, and so we can see how we can keep doing that in the future. And I think that's just great. So thank you for being what you are and what you do. We really appreciate it. And thank you for your time today.
You're very kind. Thank you so much. All right.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Hopefully we'll get down and play for you guys
Yes. Oh,
soon.
yeah. And get down here and do the whole thing. That would be fantastic, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. All right. Thanks, Joe. I'll see you
Cheers.
later. Bye.
Bye.